IB Microeconomics only for higher level. This is Bradley. So today we'll cover the third section of the production and cost for the chapter of the theory of the firm and the market structure. And this is actually one of the most important thing that you should understand and memorize the graph. Okay, so we will first practice how to draw ATC, ABC, and MC curve. So first, we covered MC curve, but we didn't cover ATC and ABC curve. But you should understand how to draw them and understand the feature of them. So I will draw all the three different graphs at once in one plane. And for x-axis, you should label all of the axes. For x-axis, we have quantity of output or just quantity. And for y-axis, we have cost or price. Whatever you want to put is fine. And we will first draw MC curve. It is way better than just drawing in a weird way. So this is a fancy MC curve. And now we will draw a fancy ATC and ABC curve. So I usually recommend to draw ATC curve first after drawing MC curve. So first you mark the point on the MC curve, and to the right draw, the left draw, and it should look similar to the left and to the right, and this will be ATC curve. So the feature is that the ATC curve, the minimum of the ATC curve will pass the point on the MC curve. And for the ABC curve, it will be wider for the left side, and it will be steep for the right side. This is ABC curve, or average variable cost curve. And you can see that again, ABC curve, the minimum of the ABC curve passes the point on the MC curve. So the feature is that ATC and ABC curve, all of them's minimum passes the points on the MC curve. And that is one of the most important observation. And actually, I didn't mention AFC here, average fixed cost curve, but I will draw this again just to clarify. And actually, you can just ignore the minimum point for the MC curve here when you draw a FC curve. So a FC curve will start to decrease, and it will continue to decrease forever. And the reason is, if you think about the definition of the fixed cost, so we have the fixed cost and it does not change actually, right? But the quantity will decrease. But the definition of the AFC is TFC over quantity. As quantity increases, AFC will decrease because TFC does not change. So that's the reason why it will decrease forever. But for other graphs, it will have like that kinds of graph. And actually, this is not really important. I will pass it because it's not really important. So you should understand this graph will look like this. Okay, and actually you should understand what these points means. These sections, it has a meaning actually, but I will skip it from now on. But you will see soon for profit section. Okay, let's move on. And this is review of the second lecture that we have discussed a little bit about the relationship between the product curve and cost curve. So I mentioned they have an inverse relationship. So the relationship is inverse. Sorry. So here is the output for the y-axis, right? So this is for product curve, and if we draw AP and MP curve, I usually recommend always marginal thing first. So MP curve looks like this, and we will have APL curve, which will look like this. Again, AP curve the maximum of the APL curve should pass the point on the MPL. Okay. So now we will draw the cost. So they have an inverse relationship again. So it is really simple to draw. So MC curve will look like this. And actually it is important to make sure that the point where the law of diminishing returns happen, LDR happens here, right? For MPL and at the maximum. And even at the minimum, LDL will happen, law of diminishing returns happen. I already explained this before. So this is the graph of the MC curve. And for the ATC curve, it will look like this, right? Because the minimum of the ATC curve should intersect with the MC curve. So that is the graph that we have, and it should look similar as well. And that's like everything here that we can cover. Let's move on. So again, we will review the difference between short run and the long run. And it is quite important because now we will cover the case when the variables are changeable, means that it is in the long run. So in the short run, there's no fixed input, right? So in the short run, there is a fixed input. Fixed input exists, but in the long run, fixed input does not exist. Okay, you should change the notes. So in the short run, we usually have the fixed input like length and capital or labor. So this is not the one that I covered before, but usually if we have labor and capital as a resources, as a variable resources, then we need to just set one variable, one resource as a variable or fixed. So for example, I fix the number of capital. Then we will change the labor, the number of labor. Or otherwise, if we fix the number of labor, we can change the number of capital. This is how it works. And now we will explain, okay, the law of diminishing returns. I think I mentioned, but you should remember this. The law of diminishing returns only happen when the firm is in the short run, not in the long run. Okay, move on. And now we will start the actual class for today. So ATC in the short run, that is the thing that we have covered before. So AFC will look like this. Okay? And ABC will looks like this, right? And therefore ATC will look like this. So I'll explain a little bit. So AFC will initially has a higher AFC, right? Below ABC. So ATC, okay, again ATC is AFC plus ABC. So higher AFC and low ABC. That's the reason why we have higher ATC initially. And in the midpoint we have the lowest AFC, and the middle of the AFC and the lowest ABC. So we have the lowest ATC, and after that we have the lowest AFC, but we have really high ABC, and that's the reason why we have high ATC at the end. Okay. Pass. And this is quite tricky. First, I will draw how ATC will look like in the short run. So this is the one that we know, right? And this is, I mentioned, short run ATC 1. So in this case, ATC will look like this for this time. Okay, I will give an example. I will start my own prep school, and I will spend this only one classroom to teach 20 students. Okay, I have one classroom to teach 20 students. Okay, in that case, ATC will look like that. To borrow the classroom, I need to pay some money, rent fee, right? However, if there is so many students, but I only have one classroom, what I mean is, I now have 60 students, but I have only one classroom. But of course, in that case, the classroom will be already full, right? In that case, I need to spend another money to devices to teach them, and it would cost higher than when I just pay or just rent another classroom. Because it will be the shoulder rent, and usually shoulder rent is more expensive than you just borrow the longer rent fee. And that's the reason why so this will be 20 students for the quantity, but this will be 40 students for the quantity. So we have higher ATC because we don't have enough space to teach students only with one classroom, because we need to borrow other places to teach other students, and that's the reason why it has a problem of higher ATC. So now in the long run I can change my mind, or in the short run I can change my mind. So now I have 2 classrooms and I can teach 40 students, right? But the price will start to decrease more. Looks like this. I will erase this. This is Shodan ATC 2. So in that case, Shodan ATC will shift downward into the rightward, and the reason is we have now 2 classrooms, right? So if you have 2 classrooms, then it is possible to kind of make a deal with landowner, if you want to rent only one classroom, perhaps you need to pay $1,000. But if you want to rent 2 classrooms, it's not just multiplied by 2, but you can make a deal as a landowner, perhaps $1,500. Then the ATC of course will decrease, right? And that's the reason why Shodan ATC curve will shift downward as well, not only shift rightward, because we have more quantity. So this will be for 8. Okay, I already say 80. I wrote 4 classrooms. And we have a Shodan ATC 3. In that case, we have 160 students here. So what's the problem? Why the cost increased more than before? The reason is because we don't have efficient entrepreneurship or management system or kind of the operation manner to efficiently distribute our teachers, the classrooms, or even students, things like that. So we have more cost to operate our prep school more in an efficient way than before, because we have more space, we have more teachers, even we have more students. In that case, our entrepreneurship will be affected negatively. And that's the reason why Shodan ATC will increase or shift rightward and upward than before. If in the long run, the graph will look like this. So if you study physics, you learn this in wave phenomena, only for high level actually, whatever. So we say enveloped ATC curve. This is enveloped curve. So these lines are long run ATC curve. Okay? But this doesn't look really good. So I will make it more fancier, more emphatic, to make it clear to understand. Then we will have a long ATC curve, looks like this. Again, this is U-shaped, a little bit different, right? So this is long ATC curve, and this is quite important because we have 3 observations here. The first point will be here, second point will be here, and this is the third point. In the first point, we will have economies of scale, or we have a term increasing returns to scale. I'll explain what they mean later after writes everything. And in the middle way, we have constant returns to scale. We don't have any term related to economies of scale or diseconomies of scale. only we have the term constant return to scale. So I will abbreviate as CRS, and for increasing returns to scale, I will abbreviate as IRS. Is this economies of scale? And another term we have is decreasing returns to scale. So it is important to draw in your note and memorize always, not just understand. Please memorize in your brain, engrave in your mind, and that's the best way to deal with economics to get the 7, whatever. Yeah. So I'll explain now. Economies of scale. What is economies of scale? Perhaps you guys learned this term before. Actually, in Korean, it's quite familiar term that everyone uses in their daily lives. So the big difference is that when quantity increases, ATC will decrease. And that is one of the most important observations. So this happens when quantity increases, ATC decreases. For the second case, case 2, constant returns to scale. In this case, when quantity increases, ATC does not change, it remains at the same. So quantity increases, but ATC does not change. And for the case 3, there is an increase in ATC when there is an increase in quantity. So when quantity increases, ATC also increase, and that is we call this economies of scale or decreasing returns to scale. And now I'll explain the term returns to scale. Okay, I'll delete this first. So what is returns to scale? It is related to the concept of output and input. So we have input and we have output. So when input is increased by 2, I mean multiplied by 2, and also output is increased by, multiplied by 2, then we say this is the case of constant returns to scale. So when there is an increase in the input, proportionally output will increase. In this case, we say this is the constant returns to scale. But how about increasing returns to scale? This is actually similar. Input increased by, multiplied by 2. If output multiplied by 3, then we say this is increasing returns to scale. So this means that we put our input to produce something, right? But what they will give for me will be more than I put as an input. So like their output will be greater than what I put as an input. So that's the concept. And for decreasing return to scale, of course you guys will understand when there's an increase, when doubles the input, only the output does not actually change or less than double. Then we say this is decreasing returns to scale. Okay? Let's move on. So here is an explanation for economies of scale. And I will only explain, I'll just explain everything. So the most important thing is to understand how it works, how it is possible to happen economies of scale. And usually it is related to the size of the firm. So if the size of the firm is larger in the long run, this means that ATC can afford. The reason is we have a much larger, and that's the reason why we say economies of scale. That term has the meaning that the size of firm will be greater than before. And in that case, because of some other reasons, we will learn just like right after this slide. So due to some reasons, the ATC will start to decrease, and that's the reason why we have economies of scale. Okay, second bullet point. Usually it works only for small and middle-sized enterprises, medium-sized enterprises. And the reason is because they have a smaller company, they have a lot of potentials latent to increase their size of their companies. And that's the only reason why it usually works for the economies of scale usually works for small and middle-sized enterprises. Okay, let's move on. Source of EOS. You need to understand, memorize everything. No way. The specialization. This is like quite common way how economies of scale works. So it says division of labor. I'll just give an example. So who will be better? Like Nancy. I will give an example of Nancy. So Nancy is a marketing department, right? So she needs to make some do some Photoshop, make some illustration as well, right? But the problem is that she needs to do everything, some marketing, some Photoshop, some pictures, editing, everything. She needs to do that. And even for example, Mr. Ascot is not here, so Nancy needs to make video as well. In that case, it will be disastrous. It will be just like catastrophe. Everything doesn't work because she needs to do everything. She needs to do Photoshop, she needs to use Illustrator, even she needs to use Final Cut Pro to edit the video as well. And this is not a good thing because she can't do everything at once. So here is a kind of knowledgeable person decided to make decided to make a kind of department for the marketing. So, marketing department now have 3 different people. One for Photoshop, another for video making, and the third one will be for Illustrator. So now we have divided labor, and in that case, it's much easier for them to specialize their own works to do the work that they are actually familiar with and good at. And in this case, the average work cost of course decrease because now Nancy doesn't have to do everything, and it is more efficient for us, even for companies. Okay? How about marketing? So marketing is related to the cost for the advertising cost. So now, I will give an example again. Now I want to advertise, I made my own company, my own tech company, and I will make my own cell phone. So its name is Brad One. The problem is that nobody knows the name of Brad One, and I need to advertise this with a cost of $10,000 only for 100 Brad One. However, if we think about the Apple will launch iPhone 13, for example, and they perhaps cost $1 million, but I would just say I'm not sure, $1 million. Okay, it's huge compared with the Brad One, but the amount the iPhone 13 that they can sell as an Apple will be more than 100, way more than 100, kind of $100,000 iPhone 13. Even if they spend a lot of money to advertise iPhone 13, they can sell way more phone for their compare with Brad One. And that's the reason why the marketing cost will start to decrease when they sell more phones. Usually because advertising company do not pay more money if you need to produce more products. And that's the reason why usually advertising costs will decrease when you produce more and more quantities of your own product. And now we have the term indivisibilities or efficiency. Indivisibilities is like undivided, it's like impossible to divide something. So actually, we can think about like capital goods. So I have a machine to produce bread 1 again. So bread 1 can be produced with the machine by 300, right? But I already mentioned that I only need to produce 100 bread 1. But the problem is that I have a surplus of 200, right, with that machine. But I will not produce that much because, but even if I will produce only 100, I need to buy the machine that can produce 300 of bread 1, right? And that's the problem. That is indivisibilities. So the capability of the machine is larger than what I need to produce. And this means that if I can produce more and more, if my company's size can be greater than before, then the cost to run or operate the machine will decrease, right? Therefore, average total cost or ATC will decrease as well as Q increases. Efficiency is same. Sometimes when machines are more efficient, when we produce more things because of some economies of scale, like that is how we explain. Like we have a machine, but we have like machine that can produce 300 bread 1, and we will have another machine that can produce 1,000 bread 1. In that case, usually the unit cost to produce something is lower for bread 1. The machine that can produce 1,000 bread 1. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. And here is some other things that you should understand for source of economies of scale. First thing is discount for work orders. Like when you order a lot of raw materials, for example, I need to order 100 display for my LCD for my bread 1, but for Apple, they will perhaps order like 1 million LCDs or LEDs to the LG display, and in that case, it is possible to order the bulk, and therefore it's possible to have some discount for Apple. Okay. And the fifth one is lower transportation and shipping costs per unit. It's like so obvious, I'll skip this. And the sixth one, this is quite tricky. It's kind of the market discrimination, price discrimination, kind of. So like big player, like if your firm is actually quite big in your market and you have a lot of market share, in that case, you perhaps have a higher credit ratings because you are actually reliable, right? Of course, you are a big player in your market. So in that case, banks will prefer to lend money to the big company, not a small company, where firms can just disappear, right? Somewhere else, whatever. And sometimes it's possible to disappear to small companies. But usually, if you are a big company like Intel or Microsoft, it's really hard to disappear unless there is kind of big crisis, economic crisis. And that's the reason why it is possible to be a source of economies of scale. Okay, next. Oh my gosh. So this is the last one. So this is quite special case. So we have a market barrier. We use that term if you go to the next chapter, the market structures. So if it is possible to have a strong barriers to entry. So this works as a strong barriers to entry. And the reason is we need to invest a lot of money in buying kind of machineries or some other utility things like that, and this will be fixed cost. So in that case, fixed cost will be really high for the similar amount of production. However, after that, if you just continuously produce your own goods, then the ATC will start to decrease because usually for these kind of markets, operating costs will be very small. So you should understand what will be the examples of this. So usually we have utilities like electricity or water or transportation, things like that. So these are mostly utility things, kind of necessity, and they usually have a higher initial investment cost. However, operating cost is really low compared with the investment cost. So now we have this economies of scale. So as we know, it's similar to economies of scale, but just the opposite direction. So size will increase again. However, ATC will rise. That is quite not insightful because you understood economies of scale in a way that when firms get larger, the ATC will decrease. However, there is some problem. If your company is too big, then your efficiency will start to decrease because of the bigness of your company. So as an example, we can think about the Microsoft or Intel or General Motors or GM. They are big players in their own markets. Especially General Motors was one of the most big players in the market, in the car company. The problem is that they have like four different brands for this one company, 4 different car brands. This means that the company was too big to efficiently operate and manage their production lines, even their offices as well, even to manage like laborers or buy some enough amount of the capital, even that was too hard because it's too big. So actually the US government decided to divide the company to the 4 different brands. I forgot the name, perhaps one includes Ford and some others as well, but so you can use it as an example. So in that case, as the US government did, we need a sales division to increase the efficiency, okay? And now we will see the source of economies of scale, this economies of scale. Okay, let's move on. So we have 3 different things. Communication. So the communication is like your company is too big, okay? So like our utility is too big. And now we have like 500 teachers, 5,000 students. How does it work? We have now we have 10 different principals. That will be disastrous. Like teachers don't know where they need to go to get a permission to buy something to the principals, because we have 10 principals and each principal will be like, hey, it should be my work. It is not that principal B's work, you know? So like they will want the signature of every principal, and this will be extremely inefficient, right? And it happens really in your real life, in your companies. And that's the problem of the communication, which causes this economies of scale. And the second one is coordination, which is office politics. So like we have Mr. Bajati and Mr. Peebles. But the problem is that some teachers will follow the opinion of the Mr. Peebles, but some of them will follow the opinion of the Mr. Bajati. But the problem is that these will cause the politics in the office, right? So like some of them will prefer to follow Mr. Peebles' arguments or their kind of ideas, but the problem is they will only follow what Mr. Peebles tells, and it will cause inefficient work. Like they will not prefer to maximize the profit of their company, but maximize the profit of their teams of Mr. Peebles. Same for Mr. Bajati. And that is how office politics works. Last one is increased regulation. Of course, if the firm's size is too big, then it can cause kind of monopoly or oligopoly. You will learn this later. That's the reason why government will give more regulations to reduce the size, to divide the companies, as much as possible, and it will cause of course high cost of production. Okay, next. Now we will learn how we find out, how we distinguish the law of diminishing returns and economies of scale or increasing returns to scale, whatever. So here we have constant returns to scale. So as I mentioned before, law of diminishing returns only happen in the short run, while constant returns to scale only happen in the long run. Okay. So there's no relationship between the constant something returns to scale and law of diminishing returns. That's the important thing. Okay. So as I mentioned before, I will first start with returns to scale, constant returns to scale. So when there's increase in the input, output should doubles, right? So when input doubles, output should doubles. So unit of capital is increased from 1 to 2, which is doubles, and the unit of labor is also multiplied by 2. In that case, the number inside the matrix is the output produced. It was 100, but it now increased to 200. It also doubled, right? Therefore, this is the constant returns to scale because when input doubles, output doubles as well. Same for the third one. So when unit of labor increased by and multiplied by 3, and capital also tripled, then the quantity of produced tripled as well, right? That's the reason why we can say this is the case of the constant returns to scale. Okay. Now we will distinguish the law of diminishing returns. The law of diminishing returns is quite tricky because I already mentioned that we should decide which factor, length or capital, which factor we fix, which factor we change. So I will fix the unit of capital as 1. So we will only think about this column, and we will change the unit of labor. So when it is 1, the quantity produced will be 100, right? But when it increased by 2, the quantity produced will not be times 2, but times 1.4 only. This means that the law of diminishing returns happen when unit of labor is doubled, but the quantity of produced does not double. It's not doubled. It only times 1.4. Okay. It happens the same if we fix the labor. So we will see this case. It's hard to explain. So I will fix the labor as 1. Unit of labor. So now I will change the unit of capital. So when it is 1, the quantity produced is 100, right? But when it increased by 3, it's tripled, right? But the quantity is not tripled, it's only times 1.6. Again, the multiplication of the quantity is less than the multiplication of the unit of capital. Therefore, we can say this is the law of diminishing returns. Okay, let's move on. So now we will see the economies of scale or increasing returns to scale. I will skip law of diminishing returns because it happens over the time. It's always happens the same way, in the same manner, but only there's a difference of returns to scale. So this will increase, this will doubled, the labor also doubled, and quantity was 100 for this time, but quantity has tripled, right? Therefore, input has doubled, but quantity has tripled. Therefore, we can say this is the case of the increasing returns to scale. Let's move on. Last slide. So this is the last slide, which is decreasing returns to scale. So decreasing returns to scale is when input is increased and we multiply by 2. The case that the quantity does not increase or only increase by 1.5. Multiply by 1.5. Less than the change in the input. So unit of labor doubled, labor doubled again. However, the quantity only increased by time 1.9. which is less than 2. Therefore, we can say this is the case of the decreasing returns to scale. And this is the end of today's class.